Alright, so just a little bit of feedback on the testing for parametric data homework. So this is the work that we've been doing to see if your data is parametric. So we know that first criteria is that it has to be interval, so it has to be rankable and continuous data, which this is. This is lengths in millimeters. And we also know that we need to test the four kind of parameters, really trying to show if this is a normal distribution or not. All right, and so most people did a really good job on this. There were two main aspects that, actually three main aspects that sometimes people struggled with. So we've given feedback on the in the homework itself, so make sure you're going through that. In terms of missing data, obviously these numbers need a lot more information. Your lab notebook would want to know where this data is from, what the units are for this measurement, why you're doing this study. Did you take, are these measurements from two things on different sides of a pond or on different sides of the world, on the East Coast and West Coast, whatever it might be. I can guarantee that if someone else came to look at your lab notebook and you didn't have that information really setting up the whole lab, the whole purpose, the data measurements, where they're from, why you're doing it, then they're not going to be able to interpret your data and move forward. And I also guarantee from my own unfortunate experience that when you come back even just a couple months later, you're not going to remember all those things even though you assume you would. So you really need to get used to just kind of putting as much information in your lab notebook as possible. So that's really all that first question was about. All right, so the other two things. One, the biggest thing was people trying to figure out how many bins to have. So remember, there's a slide in there, and you can go back and see them, but there's a slide that basically says you're looking for generally between 5 and 10 bins. And 10 bins is kind of probably more the norm if you have close to 50 data points. 5 bins is more the norm if you have anywhere less than 10 to 15 or less than 20. Because if you have too many bins, for example, let's say you made 15 bins. Well, here I see my data counts. This is the descriptive statistics for group 1 and for group 2. If I have 15 bins and I have 15 data points, I'm going to mostly spread that data out so that there's like one data point in each bin, and it's really going to be meaningless because I'm not looking at a real distribution. On the other hand, if I only had 2 bins, I'm just going to get almost all of my data in those 2 bins, and I have no idea if that's a normal distribution or not either. So you want that nice sweet spot between not enough bins and too many bins. So a rule of thumb basically is anywhere from 10 to 20 data points, you're probably looking in the 5 to 6 bin range. Anything from 20 to 40, you're probably looking in the 7 to 9 bin range, and 50 or above, you're aiming for the 10. So here we see that we have 15 data points. So we're probably looking at that 5 to 6 bin range still. So how do we do that? Well, we can see that we have the minimum. Our minimum is 10. That's the minimum data point, and the max is 21. All right, so I can see that I have a range of 11 in there. So I basically need to encompass 11 data points for about 5 bins. So with this being by itself, what I'm probably looking at is approximately a bin. So if I divide my 11 by 5, right, I'm looking at something that's a little bit more than 2. So if I made my bins a range of 2 for this, I'm probably in good shape. So I could start, I can go from 10 to 11.9. And then my next one would be 12 to 13.9 and so forth. And I'll see that by the time I'm done with this, I basically have encompassed all of my data points. And essentially have just gotten all the way from my 10 to 21 in about 5 bins. Alright, so here I've got my ranges, and I just did the same thing for the other group. So I have a count of 15, I have a range of 12, and so I want that range to be in about 5 to 6 groups. So I divide it by 5 or 6, and again, a nice even number, it gives me a range of 2 each. So I can have from 12 to 13.9, from 14 to 15.9, and by the time I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in this case, by the time I have 7 groups there, I've covered everything there. So this is a decent amount, maybe a little tiny bit on the high side, but not too bad. I have 6 and 7, and I have a nice even number. I'm not at 10 or 15 bins. I'm at a decent number. And you can see that our two groups here actually overlap quite a bit. So the reality is I could even just kind of combine these. I still need separate frequencies, but I can combine these and make one graph and so forth. So let's take a quick look at that there in a second. Alright, so here's the combined one. So basically I just made sure I have a range that covers my minimum for one of the groups, which was 10. So my range covers 10. And I have a bin that goes past the highest one for both, which was 25.5. So now I have my whole range covered for both groups. I need to do separate frequencies, so I need to do my frequency function for group 1 here, and a separate one for group 2, right, because they're not in the same data sets. And then I can just create a graph that has both of them together, or I could still create one separately and so forth. Alright, so hopefully that covers the range a little bit. Again, we're looking for bins of about 5, 6, maybe 7 if you have 10 to 20 data points. If you have closer to 40, 50 data points, and you're looking closer to the 10 bin range. But usually you're aiming for 5 to 10, depending on how many data points you have. Alright, for the bin number. Alright, the last thing I wanted to say is the one thing that people often miss too is really the labeling of graphs. You should never have graphs without labels. Right? Maybe this is partly my fault because I didn't emphasize it in the videos as I was trying to go fast, but you should always label these. You need to know exactly what these numbers are, what the units are, alright? You need to have everything labeled whenever you have a graph. That should just be standard work in science, alright? So that's kind of the only other place that people often lost points for. Hopefully this helps. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me or set up a time to meet or whatever. But good job overall on this assignment. Well done.